obnoxious car music. No one needs to hear all of that. Surely it's warmer to have the windows up and the air conditioning on, that's all I'm saying. Oh my god, hey, welcome back to my theatre-themed YouTube channel. My name is Mickey Joe, and I am obsessed with all things theatre. I'm a professional theatre critic here on social media, and this evening I am in London to enjoy one of my favourite shows from an Edinburgh Fringe past. This is the immersive, dystopian, futuristic, queer nightclub set musical Oscar at the Crown. It has recently arrived in London this summer at a bespoke new venue called The Crown, here just a few minutes north of Tottenham Court Road Station, adjacent to Monopoly Life-Sized. I have not stepped foot inside this venue yet. I am very excited, and unusually you get to film and capture content throughout the show, so I'll be able to show you a little bit of Oscar at the Crown before I tell you about it. Let's go. So Tottenham Court Road Station and the Dominion Theatre are down that way. You walk a little bit up from there and you arrive here. You can see Monopoly Life-Sized, and then we have a slightly less assuming entrance down here for Oscar at the Crown, denoted by the graphic there. It's the same one you can see on my hat. I'm otherwise not yet dressed for the show. Bear with me. A transformation is going to happen. I've been doing multiple things today. We haven't even made it all the way into the entrance yet, and I am already gagged, frankly, by this amazing design from the wonderful Andrew Exeter, filled with references, just like the show is, to the Real Housewives of just about everywhere. Featured also here on the Wall of Martyrs, which includes but is not limited to The Wicked Witch of the West, Sharpay Evans, Tammy Faye, Biggie Smalls, Miley Cyrus, Sylvia Plath, just there's so many. The Victims of the Salem Witch Trials, Venus Extravaganza, The Grinch, Regina George. Like, come on now. And here, etched on the wall, you can find the rules of the Crown. You can go anywhere, you can go live, and you can go wild with an E. What they mean by this, and last time I saw the show it was also explained by the performers on stage, is you can film, you can go live on Instagram if you want to.
Which aired January 20th, 2005. Julie Cooper picked up her vodka martini and predicted the future.
Why wouldn't America be fascinated with the lives and loves of Orange County's rich and fabulous? We're all beautiful and we're all dysfunctional. Surf, sex, and scandal. It's a recipe for a cultural phenomenon, don't you think? She was right! Ah! Don't you cry?
Consequence. Whoa. You
Oh my god, that was the vibrant theatrical experience which I remember, and so much more. Now I'm gonna go home and mention it all. And now here I am, back at home, ready to do just that, let you know everything about Oscar at the Crown. Although hopefully I don't need to do quite as much explaining of the nature of the show and the aesthetic of the show and, you know, the vibes of the music and the experience, because those clips that I just shared will have given you a pretty strong sense of what it sounds like, what it looks like, maybe not necessarily entirely what's going on, but certainly the vibes of the music and a little bit of the experience as well, and certainly the multiple different configurations of the staging within this immersive nightclub space. But for those of you who may be a little bit confused as to what the hell this show actually is, I will explain the idea behind Oscar at the Crown. Also, before we get all the way into it, I do have an Oscar at the Crown baseball cap which I was about to put on, but then I realised how Oscar Wilde-y my hair is looking right now, and I would have dyed it acid green just to really embrace the bit, but I very recently learned that that does nothing whatsoever for my colours. Turns out I'm a winter. Anyway, so Oscar at the Crown was originally conceived by Americans in the US. I saw it for the first time at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival 2 summers ago. I utterly loved it. It was also the last show I saw of the festival, and it gave me exactly what I needed in that moment because, you know, it was joyous and it was explosive and it was colourful, and it was a really great final show of like 50 different shows that I was seeing within a week. And I think as I talk about it, and even as I watch the footage back and prepare it to be seen on YouTube, what strikes me is that it might be a little bit of an acquired taste. And, you know, the more you wade into the world of immersive and not participatory, but like moving amongst a space and any kind of like standing nightclub, non-traditional theatre, certainly, and like really contemporary stuff like that, I think, you know, people have very different preferences and taste levels. Certainly there's a lot of very immersive theatre that I've never really bought into, that I'm, you know, hoping to try a little bit more of, but has never been my jam necessarily. This is exactly where I like it to be, because not unlike Guys and Dolls at the Bridge Theatre, I get to have the experience of standing there, being amongst it, being, you know, inches away from these performers doing high energy choreography and with a plot unfolding around you in this immersive, incredibly designed setting, and being kind of like gently encouraged and shuffled around, but not like, you know, having to make choices or having one-on-one experiences, which is exactly what some people want, or having to like improv conversations with performers. That is not what this is. No, Oscar at the Crown really leans into this nightclub setting, and it has a sort of a post-apocalyptic premise, like political apocalypse, and you're meeting all of these queer, exiled individuals in this sort of safe space that they found for themselves in the middle of the desert. That is what we come to find out. And within that space, they have created a performance venue where they have been repeatedly staging a musical that they have devised about the life of Oscar Wilde, which obviously unfolded many years before, with their leader, who has also given himself the name Oscar and who plays the role of Oscar Wilde. The rest of the performers are either dancers or vocalists who are all named after iconic Real Housewives of various franchises, including but not limited to Erica, Ramona, Sonia, the Real Housewives from Bravo TV being one of the show's biggest cultural talking points. And in general, I would characterize the ethos of the material as being an attempt to parlay the cultural significance of Oscar Wilde to the queer community as this trailblazing, important queer icon of yesteryear, to parlay that into the queer culture of today and the edginess of it and the outspokenness of it and the embracing of pop culture, and to kind of bring the Oscar Wilde into and amongst all of that. And so it's kind of punk rock Oscar Wilde with a post-apocalyptic aesthetic and this really exciting dance score. A score which we'll talk more about, but which has been written by the incredibly talented Andrew Barrett Cox, the prolific Andrew Barrett Cox. And the concept was devised and the book was written by Mark Moriello, who also stars in the show playing Oscar. Now, all of that sort of describes the show within the show and the story that they are presenting to you. And there is a plot which runs over the top of that and eventually takes over the whole thing, because they've been performing this show night after night, and what interrupts them on this occasion is the arrival of a new political exile who was, you know, just trying to survive in the desert and stumbles onto all of this and is sort of awestruck and simultaneously horrified at their way of life, but is welcomed into the fold, reluctantly ends up playing Oscar's wife in the show. But as cannon fire and the sound of explosions grow nearer overhead, she has different ideas about how best they ought to protect themselves and move forwards that are somewhat contradictory to the ideas presented by the group's leader, Oscar, and causes a little bit of a schism within the space. And it's very reminiscent of the Rocky Horror Show, actually. And my one biggest issue with the Rocky Horror Show is that, you know, it was so relevant and subversive and countercultural and edgy when it first premiered at the Royal Court and for years afterwards, and it's now become this sort of a relic that enduringly means a lot to a lot of people, but doesn't feel quite as transgressive and shocking as it once did, because, you know, there are generations now which grew up with the Rocky Horror Show and aren't scandalized by it. And so I think this covers a lot of new ground and kind of pokes at a lot of important conversations for the queer community about the nature of community, about the nature of centering oneself and positioning oneself as a victim in a turbulent society. It doesn't all the way go through with those conversations, and there's a lot about the end of the show that I don't think necessarily lands the plane in the way I want to, in the really satisfying way that you might expect from a fuller theatrical piece. But it certainly speaks to a lot of familiar ideas for the queer community in 2025, and in many ways feels kind of like a spiritual successor to the Rocky Horror Show, if that makes sense. Now, I mentioned the songs. You will have heard some of my favourite excerpts from the score in those clips that I just shared. The song Julie, which is the most bonkers premise. It's about how they're all sort of worshipping this conspiracy theory, religious idea that the future was predicted by the character of Julie Cooper on the OC years ago, around the same time that Twitter was created and the Real Housewives were coming into existence. But it's this banger of a song that absolutely does not need to go as hard as it does, and you could say the same for so many of the tunes in this show. I listen to them very often on the treadmill, which is how I've eventually come to learn all of the words, but they're really satisfying listens, and there is a theatrical quality to them, but it's also just great poppy club music. And it allows for these really exciting moments of dance. There is a lot of contemporary dance, there is a lot of Vogue and queer expression. The choreography is also by, guess who? Andrew Barrett Cox, who also designed the costumes, which I absolutely love. They're like gay post-apocalyptic Power Rangers. I'm obsessed with them. I love the aesthetic of the show. The aesthetic of the space and the design, which is so incredible, is undoubtedly the work of the remarkable Andrew Exeter, who also did the lighting. He's been responsible for designing not only the performance set that they use, but the entire venue space. He is so good at what he does. I think he's this rising star set designer, which is not a combination of words that I say very often, but I have never once been disappointed by Andrew Exeter's set design or lighting design. He is excellent at what he does every single time. And if you're anything like me, which is a secret fan of the Real Housewives of just about anywhere, there are so many little nuggets of geniusness just littered throughout the space, and so many other brilliant pop culture references. I mean, there's a prosthetic leg just tacked onto one of the walls, written on it, "The only thing fake about me is this," which is an iconic Aviva Drescher reference that I don't have nearly enough time to tell you about if you're not already familiar with it in this video. But if one person watches this today and decides to start watching The Real Housewives, then I've done my job. I joke, and it's not important that you know anything about The Real Housewives in order to enjoy this show for what it's worth. Now, it's been directed by Shira Milikowski. I actually think the dramaturgy is very strong, and I love the way the audience ends up being positioned within the space, how it sort of starts predominantly on one stage, and then they kind of like they grow out of it in a very cumulative way that's sort of like a tide moving backwards and forwards, because they're on this playing space and then they like venture forth and then they retreat back to it and then they go a little further the next time. And then they use these hydraulic shifting stages, they push them down into a line, and then we move around them, it becomes intraverse, and then they go to this rear stage and they're down the wall on this mirrored wall, and you know, incorporating all of this brilliant lighting, all of these brilliant scenic elements within the space, but then eventually we end up between two opposing ideas and ideology in the center of this space, like a tennis match, and like the performers are in traverse and we're the thing in the middle, looking on either side, trying to figure out which way we're going to go. And I love dramaturgically where that leaves us. Now, Gary Hickson is the music producer, Dan Sampson is the sound designer, Liv Needham is the musical director. We do have to talk a little bit about the music and the way that it's created in the space, because there is evidently a lot of pre-recorded vocal in the mix, and it's because they're also dancing full out as they're doing this, and they're going for a very particular type of sound. Like, it's not a traditional musical theatre sound. There are still terrific vocals at play here. This is not purely so that people don't need to sing or don't need to sing as fully. They are still giving you hardcore musical theatre vocals, whistle tone, high belting, screamy stuff. You can hear it in the clips, but just in order to achieve the nature of the sound that they are trying to go for and how that ought to sound in that sort of very produced club dance music context, it is necessary to that degree. So I don't innately have a problem with it. There is something that they do with the sound positioning because they're moving throughout the space, and there are a lot of techniques now where the locations of microphones speak to different speakers. I know they do this in Starlight Express as they're racing around the auditorium, and it conveys where the performers are, and so it moves to a different speaker. I don't know if we need just a slightly more sophisticated version of that, where rather than switching between like over here and over there, there's like a middle, and so it like fades between, because it was occasionally, well, on more than one occasion in fact, just a little bit abrupt as a performer moved from one location to the other, or it didn't catch up with them in time. I also don't think it's a big enough space that we really need to be that specific in the directional quality of the sound. I think, you know, there's two ways you can look basically, and if it sounds like they're coming from that way and you look and they're not that way, you just look the other way, and then, you know, moments later you've found them. We're all going to be okay. And that's just my assumption anyway. I have never sought to create theatre in this kind of a challenging space, so ultimately what do I know? Now, for those of you who haven't stood for a theatrical experience before, if you didn't do like the Guys and Dolls at the Bridge Theatre, this is very comparable to that kind of an experience, only it's significantly shorter. This is only one act. I think it's either 80 minutes or 90 minutes, somewhere in that region, and you can go to the bar during, and you can move around the space at your convenience, and there are quieter parts, and certainly at the performance that I was at was a really, really great level of, you know, enough people there for it to be a full enough and exciting crowd, and for you to be amongst that crowd, but never oppressive and never challenging. There was always space and freedom to move, and the show doesn't encourage you in a direction on many occasions at all. It does it quite infrequently, but it doesn't feel like you're standing for 90 minutes. If anyone's hearing this and thinking like, oh, the prospect of standing, and for some of you that might not be possible, and of course that's a different situation, but it's not like standing and watching a show where you're static. Because you're moving around, it feels completely different. And the entire theatre going experience is deliberately also quite exciting. You can get there a little bit early. The venue opens up 1 hour before the performance begins, and before they start you have performers dancing and singing along to the terrific pre-show playlist that they're pumping in, and like hanging off of the walls, and you can buy a drink and you can admire it all. There are a couple of VIP seating sections that I don't know if I would necessarily recommend. They offer a very different type of an experience, but they're deliberately sort of to the side, so you do, I imagine, feel a little bit removed from the narrative, and you can admire the sound and the performances, but it's more from afar. But all of this said, to try and encourage you to check out this show for yourself. I have had a really great experience twice now. It's going to be very different to a lot of other kinds of theatrical experiences that you might have had before, but I think it's so vibrant, it's so vivid, it's so like celebratory of the queer community, but not in a way that's inaccessible if you're not part of that community. I love the music, I love all of the choreography, the cast are so talented, and I'll tell you more about the performers in just a moment. But if this is not something that you've ever done anything even adjacent to before, I encourage you to, you know, take a step outside of your comfort zone and go and check it out near Tottenham Court Road. And it's not to say that it doesn't have its shortcomings, but it really deserves to find a sort of a cult audience. I think there's a lot of people, a lot of young people, who would really enjoy this show if only they knew about it. And it has a very unassuming presence in London. My concern is just like, I mean, it's like opening a new nightclub. How do you get people to go there? How do you get people to find out about it? And it's a hard thing to market because you're trying to go for this sort of a secretive energy, but that's not really conducive to getting people to turn up at this location and come and see this very different kind of a musical experience. And I would love for it to have a more substantial narrative, and I would love for the end to have a little more meaning, and I would love for the final song, which is, you know, belted to high heaven, I would love for that to have a little more heft in the lyrics than the kind of platitudes that are offered, like for that to be this big opposition to the ideology that they've all been living by up to this point. It does kind of just start to rip a little at the seams for me at that moment, because, you know, they're not being offered a particularly substantial alternative beyond just like never lose hope, essentially, and whatever that's supposed to mean, which is nothing. It's a generic political alternative. But, and this counts for an awful lot, especially in this kind of a setting with this kind of a show, the vibes are so good, the music is so good, and the performances are also stellar. Mark Moriello is so exciting, so charismatic as Oscar, such a brilliant leader who turns to this slightly nefarious quality, very Dr. Frankenfurter in that way. Elizabeth Chalmers sounds stunning as Constance. She's the newcomer who comes in and experiences all of this for the first time, and then like raises her own voice against Oscar's, and when she raises her voice, my god, the voice that she unleashes, the vocal gymnastics, the whistle tones, the belting. I've heard her sing multiple times before. It's astonishing. Zach Marks does a great job as Bosie, very flirtatious presence on stage. Zofia Waretka, wonderful as Vicky, who is sort of the most established of Oscar's, I don't want to say minions, but that increasingly is the vibe that you get. It's very Magenta of the Rocky Horror Show-esque. She is sort of his first prophet, in a way, the first of his apostles, perhaps, and it's a really layered and substantial performance with, you know, material that is campy and has meaning, but is also full of gay cultural references and Real Housewives quotes and silliness. And so to find as much pathos as she does is a real achievement, and also, like the rest of her contemporaries, belts to the stratosphere. Many more talents in the cast, all of the dancing absolutely phenomenal, but in particular my eye kept being drawn to Estelle Denison-French, Natalie Yin, and Ran Mana. So great, executing, slaying this choreography, thriving, absolutely wonderful. And if for no other reason than to go and check out all of this talent singing this earworm score, go and see Oscar at the Crown at The Crown. That is the name of the theatrical space, next to Monopoly Life Size, just a few minutes walk from Tottenham Court Road Station in London. Performances over like Thursday to Sunday, long weekend. Go and check it out, have a very different kind of a theatrical experience, and then come back here and let me know how you got on with it in the comments. In the meantime, if you have been already to Oscar at the Crown, let us all know what you thought of it in the comments section down below. I really enjoy this show, and more than anything, I just want to make sure that while it's here in London, everyone else who would fall in love with it has the opportunity to as well. So thank you so much for checking out this video here on my theatre-themed YouTube channel. I hope that you've enjoyed. Make sure that you are subscribed with the notifications turned on so you don't miss my upcoming videos, including many more theatre reviews, theatre-going vlogs, all of the usual content. In the meantime, I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Joe Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!